So before I get started with this video, I would just like to get something out of the way. In my two recent videos, both my reactions to the first hour of FF15 video and my Chapter 0 explained video, a lot of people actually, expressed in the comments that they didn't like the fact that I was complaining about the game, even though I was really just pointing out what I thought about it and why I think it might include aspects that I personally would not like and think would be bad. Even in those videos, in my reactions to the first hour of gameplay, I only really complained about the beginning part, which I was not a fan of, and the Chapter 0 video was, well, all about that beginning part, so kind of the same thing. But regardless, why am I mentioning this? Well, because if you're one of those people that got mad at me for not believing that FF15 will be perfect, or for having an opinion different than yours and not liking an aspect of something that you did, then I suggest you leave this video now, because while I won't be hating on the game just for the hell of it in this video, I am going to be expressing some major worries that I have, as well as problems and issues with what we've seen so far, and several nitpicks, I'm not gonna lie. But with that out of the way, why don't we begin? Now, it's not fair for me to say that all of FF15's combat is completely terrible, because that's not true. But I would be lying to myself if I said that it was mostly good, because even then I don't think it is. FF15 feels to me like one of those games where a lot of people would kind of force themselves to like the combat. I'm specifically going to be talking about the combat in this video, not anything to do with the story. But if any of you have played like, let me think, like Resident Evil 4, for example, let's just say somebody plays that, you're a big fan of it, then you might want to go back and play the first 3 games, despite them being somewhat outdated, limiting, etc. You would still play through them just because you're a fan of the series as a whole. Now, I'll use one that applied to me personally, actually. The Legend of Zelda. I'm a huge fan of the series. I fell in love with the 3D games, and eventually I went back to play the originals, like Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. And while they weren't really too great by today's standards, I still played them, not necessarily in the way that you would force yourself to beat a game that was just straight up bad, but in a way where you know it's flawed, you accept that, it's never going to be your favorite game in the series, but just so you can say that you beat it, or for the experience, or so that you know what people are talking about when old fans that played it when it came out mention it. That, I feel, is the same way that most people have been playing through Final Fantasy XV's 2 demos, Episode Dusk and the Platinum demo, forcing themselves through it. Not to say that they were all bad, but for the most part willing to ignore or get past glaring flaws. Now, what are some of my actual issues with the gameplay itself? Well, let's begin with the basic problem, the camera. Camera issues were some of people's biggest complaints when it came to Episode Dusky, so much so that it was among the top issues for the fans during the feedback active time report from last year. In Kingdom Hearts 2, get used to me saying that because I am going to be comparing this game to KH2 a lot, since in my opinion, it is the pinnacle of Japanese action RPGs. But in Kingdom Hearts 2, the camera is fairly decently far away from the player, so you can see everything pretty well, and it's rare that the camera gets stuck or shakes around too much, or God forbid what happens when Noctis runs into things. Yeah, this is what we've been waiting 10 years for, guys. But on top of that, I feel like the camera is also too sensitive, and I'm not talking about camera controls, I'm talking about when it comes to Noctis. See, third-person cameras are obviously tied to the player character, right? At least they should be. I hate it when cutscenes move the in-game camera because all that does is cause issues like this one, but for the most part, where your character moves, the camera moves. Pretty basic stuff. However, I feel like FF15's camera is a little bit too tied to Noctis or sensitive to his movement, because when trying to make FF15's environments realistic, they also placed a lot of different things on the ground that affect Noctis, and I'll get more into that in a bit, but they're basically like little mini steps due to rocks or fallen tree trunks, you know, that kind of stuff. But with every single one of those things, the camera shakes when you go over them. This might seem like a little nitpick, but it's really not. It gets annoying when the entire ground is filled with things like this. And on top of that, mix that in with a tight enclosed area, and you just hit the jackpot for a terrible camera. And what does the starting section of Platinum have? Exactly those two things. You don't even need to advance down to the rocky part before the issues with the camera become apparent. And while we're on the topic of the camera, let's move on to the lock-on, shall we? One of the most basic things that third-person action games have that, in attempts to try and make it new and innovative, Square fucked up with in FF15. Lock-on is such a standard feature. You click a button and you target an enemy. But specifically talking about in Episode Dusky, you have to press a button for a soft lock-on, which really only selects an enemy. They can still go off-screen, which at that point, can you even really call it a lock-on system? But afterwards, you click a second button to actually lock on the enemy and turn the camera along with them. But you know what? They pretty much fixed it in Platinum. It's still not perfect, but it's improved. I wish that they had actually made it so that Noctis only starts his swinging animation when he's next to the enemy that you're locked onto, so that half the time he's not just swinging at the air. But whatever, at this point it's a minor issue compared to other issues that I have with the targeting. And what targeting am I referring to? Well, the magic targeting, of course. Oh boy, where to begin with this one? Okay, first of all, this is an action RPG, not a third-person shooter. Why do we need to aim a fireball like you would aim a grenade in Uncharted? See, it makes sense there because a grenade explodes and hurts everything around it in the general area. But when you shoot a little ball where a single bolt is going to hit, and if the enemy's not standing directly where that ball hit the ground, well, you're shit out of luck, aren't you? Again, going back to Kingdom Hearts 2, it had 3 different types of magic. One that hurt everything around you, one that hurt what you were locked onto from the top, and one that shot from you directly to the enemy. Let's see how FF15 would handle these. Well, if you want to hurt an enemy near you with magic, then too bad, because it can only shoot a ball a certain distance away or close to you, so good luck with that. If you want a bolt to hit the enemy, well, let's hope that he doesn't move a single inch to the left, or that thing is not going to hit him by the time it gets there. And if you want to shoot something directly at the enemy, well, I don't even think you can do that, as basic as it sounds. Like, what if I want to hit a flying enemy with magic? Can I target him and shoot it there? Nope, because when it comes to magic, the lock-on is useless, despite that being one of the main reasons to have a lock-on. And also, there's just such a delay. Like in Kingdom Hearts 2, you press a button and Sora is surrounded in flames that kill everything around him. With Noct, it's so clunky having to press and hold a button, target the place you want to hit, let go of the button afterwards, wait for Noct to throw it, and then after it lands, wait for it to shoot up in the air before it finally explodes and hits the enemy. And pray that none of your party members are standing near it, because if they are, they get hurt too. So going back on the using magic on enemies around you thing, even if you did somehow manage to do that, it doesn't matter because Noctis will get hurt from his own magic as well. Like, who came up with this? It might be realistic, but at what price? And that's something that you'll see with FF15 a lot, actually. They choose realism over good game design. Taking all of that into consideration, the only times that I ever really used magic was before the enemies noticed me to try and get some damage from far away before the fight began, and when the boss was down and couldn't move or fight back, which at that point, why even bother using magic anymore, especially if they take up a weapon slot which could be used for an actual weapon, which they do. Like, really? We couldn't have had there be a separate menu for magic like in Kingdom Hearts 2? Who came up with this? It just breaks up the gameplay, but that's not the only thing that does. Have you guys taken a look at the mechanic for firearms in the game? Those weapons look straight up genre changing and not in a good way. Hey kids, have you heard of this cool game called Bayonetta? It's a third-person character action game just like Final Fantasy 15. And guess what Bayonetta uses? Lots of guns, just like Noctis. You wanna know what the difference is? Bayonetta doesn't turn into Gears of War in the middle of gameplay. Seriously, the lock-on is there for a reason, so projectiles like magic and bullets go where the enemy is. Why then does the game introduce 2 new and completely unnecessary mechanics for aiming both of these? If I'm hacking and slashing through an enemy, clicking a button and having the character shoot him several times is fun. If I'm in the middle of gameplay hacking and slashing through an enemy, clicking a button and switching the camera's perspective to an over-the-shoulder one, which I'm also assuming changes the camera settings if you have the inverted controls, so I can then fumble around trying to line up the enemy with the reticle so that I can get a single shot in, does not sound fun. Again, such a basic thing. How did they mess this up? But you might be saying to yourself, okay. So the magic and firearms may suck. Heck, the lock-on and the camera in closed areas might be slightly broken, but you know what? I can get over small control issues when moving around. I don't need to use projectiles, etc. I could still play the regular gameplay with no issue, right? Well, you can't even do that with the game's current build, because just about every single tiny little thing takes you out of the gameplay. There's a small pole in the way sticking out of the ground? Well, instead of having Noctis just slide around it, why don't we have him stop dead on his tracks? Oh, you walk into a room full of enemies that you weren't ready for and want to run back? Well, how about we have you turn your analog stick, instead of starting the run animation immediately, wait a second or so for Noct's turn animation to happen, then his startup walking animation, then press down on the analog stick for him to run, but instead of doing that immediately, wait another second or so for him to transition between his walk animation and his run animation, hope that you don't accidentally run into a wall which stops his running and makes you start it all over again, and then head out. This might not seem too bad, it's only going to take like 5 seconds max, but it should be done in 1. In those 5 seconds, the enemy already ran up to me and hit me twice, and then I have to wait another couple seconds for Noct to get up, because when you're hit and you're down, the best thing to do is to have the character do another animation of him getting back up and recovering that takes up more time just so that he can get hit again. Brilliant game design. Seriously, like, I get making Noct's movements realistic and all that, but how many spectacle fighters do you know that do this? Again, in a game like Uncharted, it fits because you're just a guy shooting guns. You don't need to jump around, swing weapons, time attacks, etc. But with games like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, Kingdom Hearts 2, you don't have that. You press the analog and the character is already running full speed in that direction. There's no need for an animation to turn around, an animation to start sprinting, an animation and separate button click between that and the running animation. It's not necessary. Like, look at the new DMC, for example. You hold down a shoulder button and Dante switches weapons immediately. There's no 3-second animation where the character cycles through armature, grabs a weapon from the air, does a little trick with them, and then is able to attack. You know what that results in? Getting hit. I don't want to have to run 5 feet away from the battle every time that I want to change my weapon to vary my attacks from the same looping sword animation. Also, why do the animations loop like that? You see this gameplay? This is all from pressing one single button in Kingdom Hearts 2. Look how many different attacks you can do with the same weapon, but Noctis does one attack with the broadsword and suddenly enters a loop that does not end until you let go of the button. Because remember, in FF15, you don't mash the button for Noctis to attack, you hold it, which makes it feel so automatic. You know, people complained about 13 playing itself because you could just select auto battle and the character would attack. Well, here you just hold circle and you're good for the battle. This is not asking for much, is it? They're basic things included with these types of games that Square Enix themselves have done better in the past. But I guess that's just too much to ask for in FF15. You know, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe there's somebody out there that likes the aiming system for Magic, or likes the third-person shooter aspect of it, or likes the realistic animations even at the cost of gameplay. Tabata clearly does. And if you do, then good for you. But as of right now, I don't think that FF15 will hold up if it keeps this combat. Which, from the looks of it, it's going to. Even as recently as PAX West, they showed the same problems. Tell me that this gameplay doesn't look like the person controlling Noct isn't fighting with the controls. But whatever. All we can do at this point is hope that somebody at Square notices these things and attempts to fix them. And that's all that I have to say on the matter. See you guys.